What's up, everyone? Aaron Nagler here with Cheesehead TV, live on the YouTube channel for your Packers Daily Chat, coming to you from the Live X Studios in Midtown Manhattan, ready to talk some Packers with you like we do each and every day. Hopefully you guys saw Packer Transplants yesterday. If you haven't seen it, make sure you check it out. It's the goods. It's good to see people jumping in the chat already. That's always nice. Want to say hi to everybody jumping in, and we've got questions already, so let's take off, shall we? Am I crazy for still believing this team can turn things around? Adil, no, you're not crazy. Absolutely not. Now, are the signs good? No. The Packers have been disorganized. They've been sloppy. They've been anything but contender-like through the first 6 weeks of the season. However, Mike McCarthy's resume is littered with teams that started poorly and ended strong, and that has been their MO throughout his tenure. You're not crazy at all. I remember sitting there in the press box when they were 4-6 2 years ago, and people were talking about Mike McCarthy's tenure in Green Bay coming to an end. That season ended within one game of the Super Bowl. A whole lot of season left. You got to let it play out. Patrick says, the bye is a good time to make changes. Does Bryce get benched for someone like Whitehead? That's an interesting proposition, Patrick. I think the possibility is there, although I doubt that happens. I think Bryce just has to eliminate one or two plays a game, and he's actually pretty serviceable. I think he's played a solid game overall. We've all seen the big, long touchdowns where teams have taken advantage of his lack of recognition, his lack of speed. But that doesn't mean those plays can't be made, and it doesn't mean those plays can't be made by him. I think more than anything, they have to help him identify who the real threats are. You've seen teams go after him with deep speed a number of times this season. If he's just in a better kind of headspace, so to speak, prior to the snap, I think he's actually fine. I mean, you look at the year they won the Super Bowl with with Nick Collins at free safety. Remember who the safety opposite him was? It's now their current scout, Charlie Peppra. Charlie Peppra was probably about as good as Kentrell Bryce. Maybe around the same. Maybe a little better, but not by much. They can get by. They can make do with Bryce at safety. I don't think there's a magic bullet sitting on their roster. And when you talk about Whitehead, I think he's a really important cog in what they like to do defensively, but I wouldn't say that they're going to insert him into that spot. I don't think that's what he's suited for. I think he's much better where they have him, kind of that dime safety role. Are there any trade targets / rumors at all for Green Bay? Spicy, not at this moment. I know a lot of fans want to bring in names at this time of the year. You're right before the trade deadline. Right now, especially with the bye week, it gives you a chance as a general manager to look over the tape from the first part of the season, go over your roster, find out where those shortcomings are. But I mean, if we've learned anything from this kind of opening part of Brian Gutekunst's time as GM, he's much more like Ted Thompson than he is Ron Wolf, his two main proteges. I would have to say I'd be very surprised if he traded away any assets to go get somebody from another program. Now, again, that doesn't mean it can't happen, but I would be pretty surprised. Will Kendricks get a suspension midseason? Whiskey, it's a possibility, but I think you got to let the wheels of NFL justice they go very slowly. So I would probably think it'll happen after this season's over. Now, I could get done with his live broadcast, and the NFL could announce it immediately after, or maybe Friday, because Fridays are usually the days the suspensions come down. At least the news of them does. But like I said, I would be expecting it to come probably after the season. Should have drafted Derwin James and built a defense around him. That guy is a playmaker. Nick, I had him going to the Packers in my mock draft at PackersNews.com this past April. I tended to agree with you. I think he is a difference maker. I loved his skill set. But obviously Gutekunst wanted to drop down, get that extra first-round pick for next year. Now, you can't say they got a bad pick when they picked Jair Alexander. That guy's clearly a talent. But I understand the sentiment of wanting to get a guy like Derwin James, who is making a difference this year for San Diego. And I agree with you. I think he's a guy you can build your defense around. But Gutekunst determined that he wanted to get that first-round pick. And look, if that deal or if that player falls to him year 2, year 3 of his tenure, I tend to think he probably pulls the trigger. But because he's a first-year GM, his job is to look at his roster and build for the next 5 years, build for the foreseeable future while he's in that job. Otherwise, he won't have that job for very long. So I agree. I probably would have taken James, but I understand his thinking, wanting to get more assets, He's still got a really good defensive player, someone who really helps this team, and got 2 first-round picks in the deal at the end of it. So, again, I agree with your thinking, and I probably would have done that, but I also understand why Gutekunst didn't. That synopsis of Bryce sounds like a good portion of the roster, says Brian. Serviceable, need to eliminate a few bad plays, need a few elite playmakers. Hopefully Alexander. I would agree with that assessment for the most part. I think a lot of it is about consistency and execution on both sides of the ball. So in that regards, we're in total agreement. Ethan says, how do you think Oren Burks has played against the run compared to Jake Ryan? Oh, Ethan, it's his weak spot. There's no doubt about it. All summer long, we heard assistant coaches yelling practice after practice about Burks needing to shed blocks, needing to get off and make the tackle, etc. You've seen that pop up week after week as far as guards and centers getting up to the second level and really kind of eliminating him, almost erasing him from the play. It's his weak spot, but I will say he has improved as, from where he was at the start of camp through week 6. You hope to see that continue throughout the season. Hopefully we see that instead of hitting the rookie wall, which is always a possibility. Are there any remedies to the pass rush issue on the current roster? If not, what's the answer? Matt, I touched on this a little bit on Twitter last night. I highlighted a play, the play where Goodwin went for the huge touchdown over Bryce. It was a play where they blitzed both corners. And someone in the comments said, why blitz both corners? And I said, they would blitz the beer man if they could at this point. This team doesn't have a pass rush. And the only remedy is for Mike Pettin to send more pressure. Now, of course, you can't become blitz happy because teams will catch on to it and they will game plan against it. They will have tricks up their sleeves like screens and draws, etc., to take advantage of it. But that is the only way they're going to get consistent pressure on opposing quarterbacks. There is no magic bullet left on the roster. I highly doubt, as I said before, that they trade for somebody who, I know fans out there are pining for the Chandler Joneses of the world, but I don't see that happening with this general manager. It's going to be up to Mike Pettin to scheme things, and it's going to be up to Pettin to scheme them earlier in the chains. We've seen a lot of third down pressure, but we've seen a lot of comfortable quarterbacks on first and second down. And I think he really needs to start changing that up a little bit after the bye. Can you explain what, in your opinion, feels different this year? As you've said, when usually Mike McCarthy circles the wagons. Absolutely, Matt. Happy to kind of spell this out for people, because I have gotten a lot of pushback about this idea that I posted the other day that this feels a lot like the 1999 team. And everyone who says that Mike McCarthy's teams have a history of starting slow and improving, as I said at the beginning of the chat, absolutely. There is no question. There's a long track record to draw from there. However, what I feel is different this time around, it's kind of what we saw the last 2 years with Dom Capers, where the years prior to that, I could excuse Capers and his defense and some of the issues they were having because I felt they didn't have the personnel to be successful. But once he was given more and more personnel, you still saw a stunning lack of cohesion, of communication breakdowns, and we're seeing it more and more now on the offensive side of the ball. They've got all the weapons they'll ever need. And week in and week out, we see wasted timeouts, we see penalties, pre-snap penalties, which are the worst, which are a sign of guys not being dialed in, not focused on their job or what they're supposed to do. These are hallmarks of teams that, it's one thing if you're not executing football on the football level, where, okay, you ran a play and somebody beat you physically. As Aaron Rodgers always says, that's going to happen, that's the game. But when you're doing things that are getting yourself beat, mental errors, the wasting of the timeouts, these are hallmarks of Mike's teams that haven't been there before. Even when they've struggled early in seasons, they've still been crisp, they've still had tempo, and none of that is there this year. So to me, that is the biggest warning sign. Now, can this change after the bye week? Absolutely 100%, no question. But I've seen zero signs of it so far through the first 6 weeks. Defense only getting stops when it's absolutely needed, a worrying trend, consistently starting slow. Dan, that kind of speaks to what I was just talking about when it comes to the blitzing and the pass rush. It seems Pettin starts very vanilla. And for the most part, not across the board, obviously, but for the most part, it's been very 4 or even 5-man rushes we saw on Monday night, but very static and cover 2 shell. And teams know what to expect. And you saw Monday night, the 49ers didn't run anything exotic. They didn't run a ton of looks or different personnel groupings or try trick plays or what have you. I mean, you saw what the Bears did week 1 in that opening drive. They kind of emptied the kitchen sink. This was the exact opposite. This was football install 101 from the 49ers. They just pushed the Packers around. So to me, that is a worrying trend. I thought the 49ers let the Packers off the hook. That shot play at the end where King comes up with the interception, that's a great play. And I saw a lot of fans excusing it. Oh, that was, it's just like they punted. Except there was a wide open option underneath with the corners playing so far off the wide receivers. All they need to do is run a quick out or a button hook, and the first down is there. So, yeah, I think the 49ers really played into their hands, and that has happened a couple times this season. So, yes, I agree that it is a worrying trend so far as the defense goes. Is Rodgers off to a slow start simply because of missing a whole year, not clicking with the new guys? I have a hard time believing the knee is the biggest factor. Tyler, I think it's a combination. I do agree with you, though, that obviously he missed a great deal of time last season, but he was there for the entirety of offseason workouts and training camp. I do think there's been a bit of an issue with him and Jimmy Graham. We saw that come to the fore on Monday night. A couple of times Jimmy didn't sit down in the zone the way Rodgers was expecting him to. That's just a case of guys not having worked together a ton. But for the most part, I think the knee has been giving him issues. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I do think some of it is just him kind of reverting back to that 2015 stretch where we were inundated with what's wrong with Aaron Rodgers articles all the time. There's been a bit of that. So I think the bye comes at a good time for him to kind of clear his head and then come back to work fresh. Have we cut the young corner yet? I believe it's Brown, number 28. That kid is just flat out stupid. Now, Daniel, don't question the man's intelligence. You can say what he did, the action was dumb or whatever, but you can't challenge the man's intelligence because he's playing a passionate game and got heated in the moment. Have they cost the Packers? Yes. Were they dumb penalties? Yes. But I don't think the man himself is stupid. I think that's unfair. As far as Brown, no, he hasn't been cut yet because he's really talented. But now you're seeing kind of why he went undrafted. Out of Alabama, he put some good stuff on tape out of Alabama, but he's a hothead. He runs hot and cold. He does have a bit of an attitude, but so does Jair Alexander. Jair is just really smart about how he uses it. And just because he's had a couple penalties doesn't mean you just cut bait. I think there's a promising future there for him if he can learn to control it. Do we need to invest more in the O-line? Regardless, I think you're always wanting to kind of make sure you're replenished, so to speak. I know Cole Madison is looking like a bit of a wasted pick at this point, unless he somehow ends up coming back to the team later on this year or next offseason. But yes, I absolutely think they do. I've spoken to both personnel people and offensive line coaches throughout the years, and there's a number of ways you can build your offensive line, but the old school philosophy is the one I happen to agree with, is growing your offensive line. It's kind of how the Packers have operated, taking guys in that 3rd, 4th, 5th round range, having them sit for a year or two and growing them in your system, and then inserting them as other guys leave. We've seen that with Lane Taylor. We've seen that at the beginning of this year with Justin McCray. Now, might they need to invest some higher picks? If, say, Brian Balaga's not back next year, they may need a tackle. Maybe they need to find another guard if the McCray experiment ends up to be a dud, as it seems to be early this year. Those are things that they'll have to deal with. But yes, I think you're always looking to invest in offensive line at least a couple of times every draft. Any concern on Kenny and Mike Daniels wearing down? Matt, yeah, I would think so. I think you saw Lancaster play way more snaps than you'd probably like him to on Monday night, but they need to do it to keep those guys fresh. Now, that said, even with keeping Mike Daniels fresh, he's pulling a bit of a disappearing act this year. He needs to step up his play. I think he would be the first to tell you that. But yeah, his returns have been a bit disappointing this year. Whereas with Kenny Clark, I think he's been the best defensive player on the field each and every week. Now, can he keep that up given their rotation? One should hope so. Do you think the Packers should sign Ed Reed to play safety and return punts? Yeah, and they should sign Brett Favre to play quarterback too. What's going on with Lewis? 0 targets. He's barely getting an opportunity. When he's out there, it's almost always a running play. So that's a bit of a disappointment as far as I'm concerned, because I think he could help them in the passing game, but they've made him very specialized throughout 6 weeks. Do you think Breland will be ready after the bye? Your guess is as good as mine. At this point, I know there was a lot of excitement around him when they signed him. Then he popped up on the injury report with a hamstring injury, and he hasn't played since. So who knows? I would hope so, but we've got no indication whatsoever from Mike McCarthy that he's anywhere near ready to go. So we can only wait and see that first injury report from the first practice a week from today. Do you think Reggie Gilbert was a little overrated because he did all his work in the preseason, where he looked really good because other teams were so vanilla and not scheming against him? That's part of it, no doubt about it. I mean, you saw Monday night he had a very bad game. He was absolutely bowled over, couldn't hold the edge. Teams, the 49ers in particular, really kind of ran right over him. I will say, though, I still think given a one-on-one opportunity in an obvious passing situation, I'll take him over Nick Perry. And that sounds crazy because Nick Perry is making so much more money than he is, but I absolutely would. If it's a pure 3rd and 9 plus and you need a guy to pin his ear back, get around that edge, give me Reggie over Nick. That's just me. Did we have the means to get Mac? Also, I expect Geronimo to return with a vengeance. Thomas, two-parter. I'll take the second part first. Yes, I think Geronimo will come back and produce at a high level, although it will be interesting to see how much his playtime is eaten up by MVS, because I don't think you can keep that kid off the field. As far as Mac, yes, they absolutely had what it took to go get Mac if they had so chosen. It's clear that Brian Gutekunst would only go so far. And I know there are reports out there saying that, it was about the Raiders liking the package from the Bears more. I refuse to believe that Gutekunst couldn't have called Reggie and said, okay, we'll give you a little bit more. That's just me. What do you think Green Bay looks for first in the draft this year? Oh, man, ask me again in December. I'm way out of draft mode. Oh, Patrick, that's cold but fair? Someone tell Perry the QB isn't poison ivy. You can touch him. Ouch. Did any of the guys the Packers worked out look good? I haven't heard anything. Once the bye week happens, everyone kind of hunkers down, either gets out of town or disappears off the face of the earth when it comes to text or email. I was intrigued that they worked out that tight end from Oakland, though. Don't you think it's important that we use Lewis's big body against the Rams? In so much that they're going to need to keep Aaron upright, yes. Although Lewis has been up and down in pass pro so far this season, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's not getting on the field a lot, so he doesn't get into a groove. But I think every resource needs to be made to keep the edges secure, but much more so, I mean, the big worry is obviously Aaron Donald and Ndamukong Suh. That's interior. That's about Corey Linsley, Lane Taylor, and most likely Byron Bell. I would think McCarthy would have to, scheme up, making sure that the ball gets out of Aaron's hands quickly. Maybe this is where we see the jump start of the quick passing game at the beginning of the game rather than, at the end when they're in furious comeback mode. Is there an audio-only podcast version of Packer Transplants? Tyler, yes, Packer Transplants is available on every single service you could ever want as far as podcast goes. On iTunes, on Spotify, on Google Play. Just type us in, on Stitcher. Just type in Packer Transplants and you'll find it there. And that feels like a good place to leave it. Thanks a lot, everyone. I'm sorry if I couldn't get to your question. They do fly by very fast. It's so great to see so many people here each and every day at Packers Daily. Thank you so much. If you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to our channel for all the latest goodness. You'll see things like Corey Banke apologizing to Mason Crosby for wanting him cut last week. My personal favorite video at this moment. If you're on Facebook, make sure you share us with your friends. In the meantime, thanks a lot, everyone. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.